Let's go to that National Cabinet meeting today. They all fronted up, of course, very important issues about domestic violence, Cam. Two announceables, $5,000 to support women who are fleeing a domestic violence situation, and then some broader bans in relation to the sharing of AI-altered intimate photographs. We call this revenge porn. Now, fair enough, I think they're both pretty worthy, but the biggest issue is bail reform. Absolutely the biggest issue facing this country. Yes, it's in great part it's a state issue, but all the premiers were around the table and they completely dodged that issue. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and this is the sort of thing where those in the criminology space, those in the front line who are dealing with victims and people and families that are affected by domestic violence or family violence say will make the biggest difference. Something where, for example, if there's even a whiff of that kind of intent for an alleged offender, that they would not get bail, particularly those in the criminology space, say this is the kind of reform that is needed. We know that bail laws were discussed around the table today, although no announcements. We'll be looking ahead to this meeting of the police ministers on Friday, where ministers from across the nation, different states, will be discussing things like bail law reform, things like, for example, closer monitoring as well on those who they believe are at high risk of reoffending. But you're right, Peter, this is the sort of thing where advocates, where those in this space believe there needs to be reform. We've talked about, or we heard today, something of a theme, if you like, from this National Cabinet was the search for a best practice, of a gold standard where you would have uniformity and responses that take the best of every state, come up with a gold standard and are then rolled out across the nation. How long that will take to get there, we don't know. And that really is the golden question. So the focus today very much on extending this existing program, making it permanent for those trying to flee violent situations, and of course a crackdown on online, which is a bit more of a generational thing, trying to prevent young children growing up and then becoming violent or being affected by that kind of content. But in terms of immediate reform, much of which, as you point out, will require state legislation, that remains in the formative stage. And when that might become a reality remains to be seen.
Months and months and months and months. I tell you, they could have done more today. It's very, very disappointing. And, you know, Andrew Clennell was there at the press conference. He put the Prime Minister under some pressure about the bail reform issue. But then he followed up with this question in relation to the PM's appearance at the domestic violence rally over the weekend.
You've said, have a look at the tape, everyone can see what was said. Well, what was said was, do you want me to speak or not? I'm the Prime Minister. Could you have handled that interaction a bit better in retrospect?
Oh, look, it is. You've put that. You haven't put what was said beforehand. I think the video before then as well clearly indicates what the view was over whether that was appropriate or not.
What did that show? Excuse my ignorance.
You can look at it. You work at Sky.
Twice he had a crack at Sky News, James.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just shows the thin-skinned nature, I think, of Anthony Albanese under pressure, which we've seen plenty of times before here. You know, this is not the first time that he's taken exception to some piece of reporting or something that Sky does and called out Sky or a journalist. You know, he's called me out in question time before for writing things he didn't like. So, you know, this is just a very, it goes to the character. And I think that it is, you know, it shows that he's trying to do, I think, a repeat of the misogyny campaign that they ran against Scott Morrison in 2022. But I think that he has to be careful that he's not morphing into what he claims to be fighting against.
James, just before we go, she's a great mate of yours. Of course, she's a good friend of mine. But a pretty gutsy call today from Nicole Flint confirming that she'll run again for her former very marginal seat of Boothby. This is in South Australia. She's clearly up for a fight.
Yeah, no, she is. I think it's great news, you know, for her that she's getting back in the arena, that she's going to go and recontest Boothby, that suburban Adelaide seat south of Adelaide, in the next election. I think that's absolutely great. I think it's great for South Australia, and I think it's great for the coalition, for the Liberal Party, to have this such a strong performer. I mean, you know, she is, as everybody knows, she's a great performer. We see her on Sky all the time. Very smart across the issues. And I think, you know, what we saw from her today was a real laser-like focus on cost of living and the real issues in the way that the Albanese government has led the country astray. And I think she's going to be a great asset, I think, for Peter Dutton's team going into the next election.